We are in Kaplankaya on the southwestern coast of Turkey for our annual gathering Harvest series. Here we bring together some of the greatest minds with expert speakers, renowned practitioners and talented performers, all aimed at creating curiosity, opening our minds and imagining a better future. I hope you'll enjoy this interview. Hello, my guest today is Dr. Julie Holland. She's a psychiatrist, psychopharmacologist, and author of the New York Times bestsellers Moody Beaches and Weekend at Bellevue. She's editor of two non-profit books, Ecstasy, The Complete Guide, and the Pod Book, A Complete Guide to Cannabis. Her newest book is Good Chemistry, The Science of Connection from Soul to Psychedelics. Today, we'll discuss connection, mental health, over-medicalization, and also drugs. Better to say that nothing contained in his show should be used as medical advice or encouragement to use any type of drugs. Hello, Julie.
Hi, thanks for having me, Rose.
Thank you for being here very early this morning.
Sure.
On the show. So first question, you talked during a speech yesterday about connection, disconnection. Why should we care? Why is it so important today?
Yes, it is very important. And we are sort of more disconnected than ever physically, even though we may feel more connected electronically. We're designed to be social. The humans are a social animal. We're social primates. And we're actually sort of defined or designated as obligatorily gregarious, which means that we have to be social in order to survive. You know, back on the savannah, if your tribe didn't help you hunting and preparing the food or building a shelter or finding a mate, you were going to die. So on a really deep primal level, we are genetically hardwired to do very poorly when we're disconnected, and to be in a state of fight or flight when we're isolated. When we're connected, we're basically in the other side of fight or flight, which is called parasympathetic. And that's really the state of mind and body that is more healthy. So disconnection is not only sort of bad for our minds or our emotions, it's really bad for our bodies. And so I wanted to write a book about the science of connection. And when I was writing Good Chemistry, I was writing about this epidemic, you know, this epidemic of loneliness, because I wrote it before COVID. And so the whole book is about this epidemic of loneliness and how everybody needs to get together and do all these things face to face. And then COVID happened, and it really drove the isolation and the disconnection into overdrive, and it became even more of a problem. So it's worth talking about and addressing, especially now that we can start to come out of hiding and be with people again. It's important.
Yeah, to be more specific, so what are the impact on mental health and physical health?
There are a lot. I mean, it's basically like asking, well, what is the impact if you stay in fight or flight all the time? What would that do to your body, right? So fight or flight, it gets you ready to attack or escape. And so your adrenaline is up, your heart rate is up, your breathing is up, your blood pressure is increased, and also your blood sugar is increased by cortisol. So the fight or flight system is mostly adrenaline and cortisol, and those are okay for your body in short bursts, right? If you have to run for a minute or you have to hide for a few minutes, but it's not meant to go on for days and days and weeks, that you are in this state of fear and avoidance. It's really bad for your body. It's also bad for your brain. It's a pro-inflammatory state where you are more prone to illness and your metabolism is deranged and your immune system is deranged. So all those things really take a toll. And this is what we talk about with chronic stress. Chronic stress leads to physical problems and mental emotional problems. Chronic stress leads to depression. It obviously leads to anxiety and panic disorder. And then it's sort of like a vicious cycle where you're stressed and you're depressed. So you're not feeling well, you don't take good care of yourself, you don't eat well, you don't go see your friends, and all those things, not sleeping, not eating well, not being social, they put you in fight or flight. So you have this situation, a vicious cycle where you're in fight or flight, that causes emotional problems, which keeps you in fight or flight. So it's physically damaging, mentally damaging, socially damaging. You know, when you're scared or anxious, you have terrible social skills. So you can't get out of this hole. You can't get any friends when you're paranoid.
So what are the solutions? I guess like see your friends, be more connected, eat well, sleep well would be the number one solutions. But when it's gone too bad, what do you do?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about with my patients in my private practice is that you want to focus on things that are anti-inflammatory. Being in fight or flight is a pro-inflammatory state. You don't want inflammation. Inflammation, bad. So having an anti-inflammatory diet, which basically is just like a colorful whole foods diet that doesn't have a lot of white things in it. You know, bread, pasta, flour, sugar, rice, pretty much anything that's white, not a lot of nutrients. It kind of gums up the works. So those are pro-inflammatory foods. So anti-inflammatory diet is one. Anti-inflammatory activities, things like yoga, meditation, things where you're breathing through your nose and you're calm, those are anti-inflammatory. Even things like singing, chanting, floating, those are also things that will put you in the parasympathetic state, away from fight or flight. Anything in parasympathetic is anti-inflammatory. But the big one, and the thing I wrote about a lot in Good Chemistry, is this hormone oxytocin.
Yeah.
You know, as much as the fight or flight system is sort of run by adrenaline and cortisol, which are bad for your body, especially long term, the parasympathetic is run by oxytocin, which is great for your body. It is a pro-healing hormone. It is anti-inflammatory. But the unique thing about oxytocin is that it helps us to bond socially. It helps us to trust. And it helps us to figure out who's on our team, who's on our side, and who's in our tribe, which will help us to have stronger social connections. So a lot of the book of Good Chemistry is talking about oxytocin. Where do we get it? How do we have oxytocin? So extended eye contact, hand holding, cuddling, any skin-to-skin contact, sex. Orgasm is a very high oxytocin state, especially post-orgasm when you feel kind of calm and sleepy and connected to your partner. Very high oxytocin state. Childbirth, nursing is an incredibly high oxytocin state. That whole mechanism of parent-infant bonding, it's all about oxytocin. And if you don't have that very basic bonding with the infant, there are going to be huge problems with the mother and the child for a long period of time. So oxytocin is really important. So sort of anything that'll give you oxytocin is going to be good for connecting.
What are the other way, Julie, to be in a parasympathetic system?
The easiest way to get into parasympathetic is just to breathe through your nose. If you're panting through your mouth, you're going to put yourself into sympathetic. So just breathing in and out through your nose is the simplest way. If you're very anxious or you're having a panic attack, if you plug your right nostril and breathe in and out through your left nostril, that will put you into parasympathetic a little bit more effectively. Also,
you block the right one.
Yeah, it's called left nostril breathing.
Yeah,
and left nostril breathing can put you into parasympathetic. Also, anytime where you're exhaling longer than inhaling. So let's say you're singing, you take a quick breath between phrases and then you have a very long exhale controlled while you're singing or while you're playing trumpet or while you're chanting. So long exhales help to put you in parasympathetic. Floating, whether you're in a hot tub or a sensory deprivation tank, but floating will put you in parasympathetic. Just lying in a hammock will put you in parasympathetic.
Okay.
Chanting, dancing, meditation, sex, skin to skin. If you don't have access to skin, then yes, breathing is probably the easiest way to do it.
You've been a vocal advocate for the legalization of marijuana for medical and recreational use. Can you explain why?
Sure. First of all, cannabis helps to put you in this parasympathetic state. Cannabis is a potent anti-inflammatory medicinal plant. And it's all about keeping inflammation down. So cannabis, and if you don't want to be altered, just CBD is a potent anti-inflammatory. So that's sort of number one from a medical point of view. But the other issue is that relaxing, anything that's recreational, where you're feeling playful, where you're laughing puts you in parasympathetic. Recreational play will put you in parasympathetic. So it's good for your body, and dare I say, it's good for your soul, to feel sort of light and playful. One of the things cannabis does pretty reliably is something called dehabituation, which is sort of like everything old is new again. You look at things with fresh eyes. A flower that you might have walked by 10 times, and then you have some cannabis and you don't walk by. You really are looking at it as if you've never seen it before. That sort of cleansed perspective is really good for you cognitively and emotionally.
You mentioned CBD. What are the doses, like if you want to sleep or if you want to relax? What are the good things?
So CBD, some people say it's the non-psychoactive component of cannabis, but that's not really accurate because it is psychoactive, but it doesn't get you high. It's sort of not non-altering to that extent, but it is very calming and soothing. For most people, CBD isn't really that sedating. It's just sort of calming. So if you're the kind of person who gets anxious about sleep, then CBD will help you sleep. But it's not going to knock you out the way a sleeping pill will. So I recommend that my patients take around 15 to 25 milligrams, usually twice a day. It's actually fairly short acting. So I have my patients start in the morning with one a day, and then eventually I ask them to have a second one in the afternoon or evening. This is great for any inflammatory illness you have, but it's also really helpful for panic and anxiety.
Okay, good.
So I have a lot of my patients take CBD. It also can help you sort of stay calm and focused. So if I have somebody who's got issues around focus and maybe they think they have ADHD, they think they have attention problems, you don't have to just take a stimulant, like Adderall or Ritalin. CBD can be an option in that situation. That can help you stay calm and
it
focused.
Doesn't make you like a zombie or...
It doesn't usually make people like a zombie. The clinical trials of CBD are actually usually in the range of 600, 800 milligrams, like very high dose. So you've got a huge sort of a therapeutic window where you could feel the effects at 15 or 25, but you can go up to 800. So that's a very wide margin of safety. And for most people, they don't necessarily feel negative effects at higher doses.
Okay. And what about marijuana addiction and the good dose in a therapeutic or a recreational way?
Yeah. So the first thing I would probably reiterate is that this dichotomy of like, this is recreational and this is therapeutic, that is a false dichotomy. Recreation is therapeutic. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to sort of divide, like if you're having fun, you're not doing it right. That's really not true. Being, laughing, being silly, giggling, that is therapeutic. That is going to be an anti-inflammatory, put you in parasympathetic behavior. So it's okay to have recreational use. I am a proponent of decriminalizing all drugs, every single drug. It's not. You shouldn't have to go to jail because you want to get high or you want to feel good. I also have to mention, we have a big opiate crisis in America where we had a lot of people taking painkillers that are derived from the poppy plant. And the crisis now is that supply was poisoned with fentanyl, and so people are dying from overdoses. But the reason why so many people choose opium and choose heroin and choose Percocet and all of these opioids is because they feel good and they mimic the feeling of being held as if you were a baby, being held by the mother, which is a very high oxytocin state. Okay. So there's a similarity. It will, and they will put you over into a parasympathetic state very efficiently.
Okay.
One of the reasons why I want cannabis to be available medically and legally is that I have some patients who really are only comfortable with the medical model. And back before cannabis was illegal, if I had somebody saying, okay, I feel like medical cannabis is right for me, but I don't have that option, I can't go to a dispensary, I live in a state where it's not legal. And then I would have to say like, well, do you know any teenagers? Because they will probably know where to get some. And, my patients don't want to go make friends with a teenager to get their cannabis. So I feel like it needs to be available. I would like all drugs to be decriminalized, but the more that they can actually be legalized, they can be available. There will be less sort of drug substitution. It's less of an issue with cannabis, right? There's not a lot of fake pot or, cannabis that's laced with fentanyl. I mean, that's really a myth. So it's safer. You buy something, it looks like pot, it's probably pot. If it smells like cannabis and it doesn't smell very chemically, that's probably safe. The stakes go up, the risks go up with other drugs, where if you buy the wrong thing on the street, you can die. So the first order of business, with doctors is do no harm. I am a harm reductionist, number one. So one of the ways to reduce harm is to make sure you have a safe drug supply. And the way to make sure you have a safe drug supply is to make it legal and legally available so people know what they're getting.
And what would be the impact on addictions?
Addiction is a complicated term, and there are lots of different things to think about with addiction. I mean, the drugs that are most addictive, the biggest problem is that if you abruptly stop using them, that could be a medical emergency. So if you are an alcoholic and you drink a lot of alcohol every single day, and then you lose your supply, say you get arrested and you're in jail and you can't maintain your alcoholism, if you go into acute withdrawal from alcohol, there's a 30% chance that you will have seizures that don't stop and you may die. So this is a drug that is widely available in almost every culture, except for sort of Islamic countries where there is less alcohol. And I really like visiting those countries, actually. But it's very, very dangerous in withdrawal. And it's also very dangerous. You can have an alcohol overdose that will also kill you. Yeah. So this is an example of a drug which is legal and available, which still has a lot of issues around addiction and tolerance and withdrawal that are dangerous, and not to mention all the stupid behaviors that happen when you're inebriated. So you don't have this risk with cannabis. It is not medically dangerous to abruptly stop. And there is about I would say a 9 or 10%, or some people are putting that number a little bit higher, where people become compulsive around their use. But the idea of addiction, there's different parts to addiction, right? There's getting tolerant to a drug, so you need more and more. There's having a withdrawal syndrome if you stop. The withdrawal syndrome with cannabis is very, very mild, and most people are able to start and stop without it being particularly dangerous. So, if you look at, say, heroin or cocaine, those drugs are fairly addicted. Not everybody who uses them will get addicted, but a higher percentage than alcohol, which is below that, and cannabis is at the bottom. Okay. The only thing lower are psychedelics. Okay. Very, very low. The most addictive drug that is the easiest to get addicted to and the hardest to quit, and you'd be like, heroin, right? No, cigarettes, nicotine.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Easiest to get addicted to, hardest to quit. And now with people vaping, they are really seeing that firsthand. Wow. It's very hard to stop vaping.
Wow. What's the data on the impact of the young kids? I had heard that their brain development, if they take drug, would be altered, and they could not make the right connection in their brain.
So the brain isn't really fully formed until about age 24, 25. So there's still a lot of brain development that's going on in adolescence, late teens, early 20s. If you think of like growing a bush, and the bush gets bushier and bushier and bushier, and then eventually you come in and you prune, you cut and shape the bush because it's gotten too big and too bushy. That's exactly, that's the metaphor for what happens in the brain, where there's more and more connections being built in the brain. And then in the late teens, early 20s, there is pruning that happens. Okay. So this pruning phase, it is a very delicate phase for the brain to be in. And if you're going to have problems, it's likely around this pruning phase. So people with schizophrenia, the first time that they get psychotic, it's usually in their late teens, early 20s. People with bipolar disorder, they may have episodes of depression, but usually the first time they get manic with that up phase, late teens, early 20s. So it's a particularly delicate time in brain development, but unfortunately, it's also the most common time to try new drugs. So, that's sort of an unfortunate confluence of two things. It doesn't mean that trying drugs is going to give you schizophrenia or make you crazy, but it is a higher risk to be taking drugs in the teens, late teens, early 20s.
I guess the whole debate for the government is would legalize it, would make it more popular or more easy, and would encourage people. What's your view on that?
In the states in America where there has been legalization, they have been really watching the kids and whether the kids are using more drugs or not and how they perceive drugs. And there hasn't really been an increase in teen cannabis use in states that are legalized. And there definitely hasn't been an increase in diagnoses of psychosis or psychotic illnesses in states that have legalized. So we haven't really seen the things that people were afraid of have not come to pass. I mean, California and Maine, they've been legal since the 90s. You know, they're not all of a sudden, they haven't over these last, 30 years, they haven't had these increases in psychotic illness or in sort of cannabis addiction in kids. It's really easy to quit smoking pot, you know, and the medical risks of smoking are minimal. And it also just really comes down to safety. It is safer to have a sort of a clean drug supply that where people know what they're getting, the strength is marked, the milligram strength is marked, or it says what the potency is. That is safer than sort of, going on the illicit market, not knowing what you're getting, not knowing if there's anything extra added to it, not knowing how strong it is.
Can we talk about your life, Julie?
My life, sure. Sure we can.
So what first put you on this path of to start a career in psychiatry and psychopharmacology?
From a very young age, I was really interested in drugs. I mean, one of my earliest memories is my mom telling my dad that he should have a beer before she pops a big pimple on his back. It's not a very pretty memory, but I really paid attention to why is dad getting a beer before mom, does a procedure on him? What is this anesthesia? But I was very, very young. I didn't understand. And then when I was 8 years old, I was at a concert with my aunt. We were seeing the Ohio Players. And she let me have a sip of her beer. And I noticed that the people behind me at the concert were like, look at the little girl drinking a beer. And I was just like, wait a minute. Adults are paying attention to me. Why? What is this thing that, so I got some little positive reinforcement for drinking a beer when I was little. And then when I was about 10 years old, I tried a cigarette to see what it felt like. And then when I was 12, I tried cannabis to see what it felt like. And then when I was 14, I tried LSD to see what it felt like. And I was like a drug researcher. I was very interested. I took notes, what does this do? When I was 15, I was very curious about mescaline. I had tried mushrooms, I had tried LSD. I wanted to try mescaline, but I inadvertently experienced PCP. It's a drug that induces a psychotic state, not forever, but for the night. So I had the experience of being psychotic. I had psychotic symptoms. It was a very scary experience for me, but it got me really interested in psychosis and what the experience of psychosis is. So that was number one. But number two, I think it got me interested in harm reduction. I didn't know it at the time, but I was indignant. If I want to take mescaline, I should be able to take mescaline. Why did I end up with PCP? That's not right. This shouldn't be. So I think I got interested in this idea of drug substitution and the safe drug supply from a very young age. So I was always interested in the brain and drugs. And I knew I wanted to be a doctor from a very, very young age. I was a girl and people would say oh, you should be a nurse. And I was just like, I'm going to be a doctor.
Yay.
So I'm going to be a brain doctor. So I didn't know if I was going to be like a neurosurgeon or a neurologist or a psychiatrist. But given my lifelong fascination with drugs, the best fit in all of medicine is psychiatry. In between my sophomore and junior year, I started reading articles about this drug, ecstasy, that psychiatrists and therapists were using MDMA with their patients during psychotherapy to make the therapy more efficient, more effective, to go deeper, to get down to the stuff. If you think of therapy as sort of like surgery, where you're trying to cut the brain open to get to that malignant thing. What's causing the behavior?
Right.
Well, with surgery, it's nice to have anesthesia, so you can get to the thing. And MDMA with therapy is a little bit like anesthesia with surgery, where it allows the process to happen with less discomfort. So while I'm a pre-med at Penn, there's a new drug. I start reading all these magazine articles about a new drug. So first of all, I'm thrilled because I have literally tried all the other drugs. So new drug for Julie to try, great. But what? This is a drug that's used in therapy by psychiatrists. So I was intrigued. I got in touch with Rick Doblin back in 1985. I got in touch with George Greer, Lester Grinspoon, all these people I'd been reading about in the magazine articles. I just called them. I cold called them. Said I was writing a paper, which I was. I had a summer assignment to write a paper, supposed to be 2 or 3 pages. I wrote a 40-page paper about MDMA because I went down the rabbit hole. I was so interested in this new drug. It was absolutely different from any other drug. It didn't, sort of make you see colors or leave yourself. It made you sort of more attentive to yourself and to your issues, but in a very comfortable way. I applied to psychiatric residencies only in New York City.
Yeah.
And my first choice was Mount Sinai because they were closest to Central Park. Okay. And they were doing very interesting schizophrenia research. And because of my experience, because I had once been psychotic, I was very interested in schizophrenia. Those people who are constantly psychotic, I wanted to work with them because I knew what they were going through a little bit. I'd had a little taste of that terror. So I chose Mount Sinai because they had the most schizophrenia research. And also I thought I could do MDMA research there. After the FDA approved the first MDMA study, I went to the chair of Mount Sinai and I said, we should do MDMA research here. And he was like, absolutely not. There's no way that's ever gonna happen here. So I made peace with that. I had to stay there for 4 years. But now the sort of funny thing, 30 plus years later, is Mount Sinai is finally doing MDMA PTSD research. It took a long time. Okay. I mean, I
You've
sort of
patient.
joke like, I am patient, but I'm not. And like, if they had just listened to me, they could have been the absolute first in the country instead of, being 8th. But still, I'm very happy that Mount Sinai is now doing MDMA PTSD research. So I have been a medical monitor for these studies, MDMA PTSD research. So these are studies where we do psychotherapy with people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, right? They've been traumatized in some way. Women who've been raped, men who've been in the military, men who've been raped, women who've been in the military, women who've been raped in the military, men who've been raped in the military, all of these people
list.
who are, it's a very long, we've all been traumatized at this point, but there's sort of like big T trauma and little t trauma. So in the context of ongoing psychotherapy, you have a session where you give MDMA during the therapy, and that session goes deeper, is more efficient, is more effective. And importantly, one of the main things MDMA does is it increases oxytocin. Getting back to oxytocin. So there is this enhanced trust and bonding for the therapist. So that really helps the whole therapeutic process. There's something called Therapeutic Alliance, which is a measurement of how closely aligned, the client and the therapist is, or the patient and the doctor is. Like if you really trust your therapist, you're going to have a better outcome in the therapy. And MDMA enhances that trust for the therapist and the connection between the therapist and the client. The data from the MDMA PTSD trials are very convincing. And next year, I believe, MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, they are the group that is spearheading the MDMA PTSD research. They will be presenting to the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA of the United States, later this year. And I would say by early next year, we're going to get a response. And it's very possible that it will be FDA approved in 2024, excuse me. In 2025, I think that psilocybin will be approved to treat depression. So in a couple of years, we're going to have 2 new potent medicines that are used during psychotherapy to help the whole process go faster. Really good psychotherapy takes years. It's like peeling an onion, there's layers and layers. And then sometimes you get too close to things that are upset, and then you lose the client maybe forever, or maybe they just go away for a few months and they come back and you try again. And it's like fits and starts. It's a long process. And so to have something that really just cuts that onion in half and gets to the middle and what is the issues, and let's just focus on the stuff we need to focus on, that will make psychotherapy much more effective and efficient. And in the long run, it will save everybody time and money. So these are going to be cost-effective medicines that I think will be embraced by psychiatry. We need new tools. We've had the same antidepressants since the 80s, the same sort of SSRI model. The antidepressants that work on serotonin, we've had those since the 80s. People have been taking them since the 80s and the 90s. They've been taking them for decades. They are good. They're not great. Now we have some medicines coming that really are great and that are going to be more effective for people.
Julie, I would like to ask you some short questions.
Good luck. Short for you.
Short for me.
We'll see.
What are the most common questions you receive from people who take drugs?
Now, the biggest question I get all the time is, I am on these antidepressants. I am taking these 3 medicines. Do I have to get off these medicines in order to have MDMA? Do I have to stop these medicines in order to have ayahuasca, which is another psychedelic that has dangerous interactions with some medicines? So the thing I'm focusing on quite a bit now are these drug interactions.
Okay.
A lot of people in the United States are on psychiatric medicines. So since the 90s, more and more people are taking anti-anxiety medicines, sleeping pills, antidepressants, even antipsychotics for depression and for insomnia. So a lot of these medicines will interfere. They will either stop MDMA from happening, or they will make ayahuasca dangerous. So I get a lot of people asking about drug interactions. That's the most common thing. The second most common thing is people asking about microdosing. So microdosing is
placebo or not. Okay.
So you're taking a small dose of a psychedelic, about 1/10 of, a big dose. And you might do that every few days, or you might do it like 5 days on and 2 days off. So a lot of people are asking me questions about microdosing. And also, people want to know about MDMA. They want to know about psilocybin mushrooms, mescaline or ibogaine. There's just a whole host of new to them, not new to me, but, drugs they're hearing about, they're reading about, psychedelics are trending, they're getting more and more popular, more and more mainstream. There's more documentaries about them. People are being exposed to psychedelics, to microdosing, to cannabis. And so they have basic questions. Well, like what's right for me? What would be best for me? Ketamine is everywhere. People have a lot of questions about ketamine.
And centers, yeah.
Ketamine treatment centers. Yeah. And a lot of these ketamine treatment centers, they're just sort of getting everything in place so that when MDMA is approved, when psilocybin is approved, the ketamine centers will be able to offer these other medicines.
I'm coming back to the first question you told me about when you start, should I stop my antidepressant if I want to start something else? I'm not sure do you have a short answer for this?
Well, the first thing I will say is it's hard to get off antidepressants. You shouldn't do it alone, and you shouldn't do it abruptly. I work with my patients and decrease just about 10% every 2 or 3 weeks. The fastest you could go would be 25% every 2 or 3 weeks. But for most people, the slower you go on the taper, the higher the rate of success of getting off. And also, if you're starting to have problems, if you're going slow, you can pick up on that earlier and stop what you're doing. But it's hard to get off antidepressants, and it's really hard to do it alone. So this is one area where you really have to ask your doctor.
Okay. How can I be sure that I buy the right drugs?
Well, as long as we have drug policy where the drugs are illegal, you can't be sure. And this is a main reason why legalization is the safer way to go, because then you know what you're getting. Counterfeit drugs, poisons in the drug supply, that is a big problem right now, especially in the United States. There's a glut of fentanyl. It's showing up in many drugs that you buy on the street, and fentanyl can kill you. And now there's a new sort of poison on the street called xylazine, which is incredibly dangerous for people, especially people who are injecting drugs. If you happen to live in a country that has dispensaries, then you can go and know what you're getting. But for everybody else, The main danger in these drugs is counterfeit drugs. And the main reason why there is that danger is because of drug policy banning the drugs.
If I have to warn my children who are into drugs about something, what is it?
So what I've always warned my children about, I mean, if we're going to talk about drugs and kids, the first thing I would say is that you want your kids to be able to come to you and ask you questions. You don't want your kids to be afraid to talk to you about these things. So the number one thing you can do with your children is say, you can ask me anything. I will try to answer it. We will look for the answers together. We will sit down and find some reputable sources of drug information. My favorite is Erowid, EROWID, erowid.org. Very reliable drug information. But the point is to keep the lines of communication open. That is number one. As soon as they're hiding from you, you've lost the battle and the danger goes up. So that's number one. And just what I always said to my kids is, number one, talk to me, ask me anything. Number two, no white powders. You're just not going to know what a white powder is. It might be cocaine. It might not. You know, it's too easy to fake it with a white powder. It's hard to fake cannabis. Pot looks like pot. It smells like pot. If it's wet and smells like a chemical, then something has been added to it and you shouldn't touch it. But short of that, seeing is believing. Same thing with mushrooms. For the most part, if you're buying a psilocybin-containing mushrooms, they're little brown, shriveled up mushrooms. They look like mushrooms. So, you're sort of safer with the natural plant medicines. Fungi is not officially a plant. It's its own kingdom, which is the fungi kingdom. So that's the biggest thing, that to at least know what you're taking. To start with a small dose or a small taste or you can't uneat it. So like, for instance, let's say there's a chocolate bar that has THC in it that has, it's like a pot brownie or a pot chocolate bar or something. It might be that bar of chocolate has 100 milligrams of THC, which is way too much for any one person to have. It may be that the dose is 1/10 of a chocolate bar, or the dose is 1/4 of a brownie. That's dangerous because most people don't eat 1/4 of a brownie or 1/10 of a chocolate bar. So it's really important that things are marked clearly with what they contain.
If you want to avoid medicines, what should you do to help with your menopause symptoms?
That's tricky. So this book that I wrote, Moody Bitches, it has a whole chapter on perimenopause, and it's called The Storm Before the Calm. Because before your ovaries kind of poop out and stop, there's a lot of fits and starts and spurts and troughs. And it's those angles of up and down that give you a lot of the symptoms. It's a long process. Perimenopause is basically an 8 to 10 year process. The average age where women stop having their periods is around 51. But perimenopause is 45 to 55, basically, so it's a long period. But before perimenopause is a great time. I call it the Mardi Gras before the Lent. That pre-menopause period in the early 40s, that is the biological basis for the cougar. Have you ever heard of this idea of a cougar?
Yeah.
There's like a woman who's like late 30s, early 40s, who's like very horny. She's actually in a pretty high testosterone phase, knows what she wants, goes out and gets it. Easier to climax, maybe done with the man when she's had her way with them, where a woman maybe starts to act more like a man.
Okay.
So there's this great cougar phase where you're horny and you're having a lot of sex, but then there's the perimenopause phase where you've got these wild swings of estrogen that give you a lot of symptoms. So there are a lot of things you can do. One thing you can do is just take estrogen. You can go on the pill or you can take estrogen supplements. That will get rid of a lot of your symptoms. And I think that people are so worried about going on estrogen because of a few studies that came out. There was a Whitehall study that made people very nervous about hormone replacement therapy. But lately, a lot of physicians have sort of walked back that and bioidentical hormones seem like they're relatively safe. If you have a family history of breast cancer, and specifically the breast cancer that is responsive to estrogen, then you shouldn't take estrogen. But short of that, a lot of people can really benefit from taking estrogen during perimenopause. Some people can benefit from taking progesterone, but you don't necessarily have to suffer for 10 years. You can work with your gynecologist. There are hormones that you can just put on your skin, where they don't go to your liver the way if you took it orally. So there's like transdermal, there's patches, there's creams, there's things you can put under your tongue. It is good to avoid the liver. So oral hormones are not as great for you as ones that just get into the bloodstream without going through your GI system.
One last question before moving to the harvest of the day. What do you, if I have a low sexual desire and I want to change this, what should I do?
That is very tricky. And again, I wrote about this in Moody Bitches quite a bit. But basically, testosterone is something that makes women horny. And women have natural testosterone, and some women have more testosterone. You may have a friend who's like very muscular and maybe has like a little bit of a heavier brow, and they're probably a little more horny, and it's probably easier for them to climax. So you could take a little bit of testosterone. It's not common. Doctors don't like to prescribe testosterone for women, but it's very, very effective. But one thing to keep in mind with testosterone is it is the hormone of novelty. You're going to be horny, but it's not going to be for the guy you married.
Okay.
So that is that,
Good
that's
to
like,
know. Good
it's
to
like
know.
a side effect.
Yeah,
Okay. I joke with my patients that a side effect of testosterone is infidelity because it is specifically a hormone of novelty. Also, testosterone antagonizes oxytocin. They sort of work against each other.
Okay.
Oxytocin works best in an estrogen-rich environment. So, but anyway, testosterone will make you horny. Novelty will make you horny. And if you are in a monogamous relationship, then you're just going to have that novelty in your head. Just close your eyes and think about whatever new person you want. It's not cheating.
Yeah.
And it can help things. Anything that increases your testosterone will increase your libido. And so that includes things like weightlifting, competitive sports, even just like running a race or playing tennis with your partner will increase your testosterone. So competition helps. But the other thing I remind people, the way that a lot of hormones work, including sex hormones, is that they respond to your environment. So like right now, my testosterone level might not be very high, but if a hot guy is in here, maybe this guy over here, like, I kind of like the way this guy looks, that's going to increase my testosterone. So you have, it's sort of like putting the cart before the horse, but especially in women, if you wait around to get horny before you have sex, you may be waiting forever. If you start the process, kissing, cuddling, skin to skin, that gets the juices flowing, literally. You have to start the process and then you'll get horny. It's different for men. Men will be horny and hard and then they'll have sex. Women have to like jump in there, get going, and then during the process, they will start to get aroused. The truth is some women are the most aroused after they have semen inside them. So you may have to just say, well, you go first and then I'm going to go. Because it'll be easier for me after. And also there's a lot going on in the head around the ability to climax and worrying that it's taking too long. So sometimes if the man is already ejaculated, you don't have to worry about taking too long. You have as much time as you want now. So like now it's my turn. So it really requires a lot of communication. But a new partner is one of the most reliable ways to increase your libido. That is just the sad truth for women.
Last question, Julie. This is harvest of the day question I'm asking to all the guests. If there is one thing that gives you hope, what is it?
Yes, FDA approval.
I was expecting this.
The FDA is giving me hope. I mean, it's really exciting. I have been convinced since 1985 that MDMA would be useful in the field of psychiatry. And finally, maybe 2025, it's going to happen. So, that's 40 long years that I have been waiting. I've been friends with Rick Doblin since the 80s, and I've been saying to him, like, this is the long game. I'm like, are you keeping your cholesterol down? Is your blood pressure down? Because we have to be, we have to be alive to see the fruits of our labor, but it's going to take a long time. So I have been eating an anti-inflammatory diet and taking very good care of myself so that I will be alive to see this event. So that gives me hope that these medicines will be available as medicines. And also, state by state, cannabis is becoming legal, it's becoming available. And now there are decriminalization bills happening where they're at least going to make psychedelics decriminalized so that it won't be a priority to prosecute people for psychedelics. So that's happening now, even more quickly than cannabis legalization happens. So all of that gives me tremendous hope.
Dr. Julie Holland, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching this episode of Harvest series. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you want to hear more, you can click on the subscribe button, and I hope to see you soon for our next interview.